Go to TAPgiles.com to learn dreams, engage my services, and support the channel. Player ownership. So this is kind of an important thing to understand, is player ownership. If we wire that into a splitter, you can see it has lots of values and lots of separate values we can get out of the splitter. This is because it's a player info type. That's what that symbol means. If we get a combiner, you can see it's got the same symbols and it's got player info there, and it has those inputs. So I won't get into the details of this. The basic idea is this is when it's not possessed. This will send a signal based on which player is actually possessing this controller sensor, and this is the color of the controller. So on your controller you can see it has a particular color with the LED light up stuff. It's that color. So now I can say, let's make this color the same as my color. Right. So when I'm not possessing it, it's just white, and when I am possessing it, it becomes blue, because it's sending that color out of that player ownership wire. And this player ownership idea kind of carries across to lots of other things. So for example, when you emit something from this object, then that is also possessed by that color. So let's have just a copy of that, and you don't need that. Let's make it smaller, make it glowy, and it has, this is just a sculpture, but any object pretty much. So if we group it, we have the labels tab, and it has player ownership. This is just a sculpture, and it also has a labels tab and has player ownership. No, painting doesn't have that, but sculpts and groups do. So player ownership also has that player info wire. So if you split it, it has those same signals, and it has the controller color. So we could wire that, if we just surface snap it on here, we could wire that into the color of its own sculpt based on the ownership. But we're not actually going to possess this object. What we are going to do is emit it. So we'll have emit. So when I press X, we're going to emit something, and what we're going to emit is that object, and it's just going to shoo off over there. But now if I'm possessing this and I press X, then it realizes that it's actually owned by the object that spat it out. So the cube I'm possessing emitted it, so it's owned by the cube I'm possessing, and owned by the same player. And if I depossess, those are still owned by me, because that's who was owning this object when I was possessing it, that emitted these objects. So you can use that to say, like, these are owned by a particular player, or they should get the score if those do something, things like that. Yeah, there'll be other tutorials about that kind of thing another time. But this is what player ownership is all about, is possessing an object through a controller sensor, and that's what player ownership means in any context where you see stuff like that. Yeah, let's go, if we get like a trigger zone, so that it's kind of clipping into that, so it's going to detect it. By default it's on possessed controller sensors, which means it will detect anything with a possessed controller sensor attached to it, like this cube, and that's why that cube is flashing. Yeah, so now if we have that just make this glow a bit when it's detecting a possessed cube, and then we possess it, it's detected it, so it's making the floor glow. But this signal, we can split that signal, and see it's also one of those player info wires. So if we just have that open over there and use test mode, we can possess things and stuff while seeing the gadgets. So let's go to modes, test mode, and then possess this. So it's sending out a 1 because the player 1 is possessing it. So again, we've got that same thing about player ownership happening with the trigger zone. But if we go onto labels and put it down here, so this is emitting objects, and they're going to like land over here somewhere. So they're landing over here. These objects don't. So these objects still know they are owned by me, player 1, but this doesn't know. So when we split it again, they're detected, and look at that, it thinks that everyone owns it because it's just not sure what's going on. That's because when it's like possessed, it's like obvious who owns it, but otherwise has to figure it out. So that's an option you have to turn on. If we turn on consider players, then it will care about which player is owning it. So it's because this was emitted. I own it because I emitted it. So that's why player 1 is lit up. So when you see things talking about consider players, it's talking about when there's an output from that gadget that is a player info type of wire. Does it care what player actually owns the thing it's detecting? So you've got stuff like health modifiers and health managers and laser scopes and all sorts of stuff that has a consider players option, and that's what it's referring to, is the player ownership of the object it's detecting. We've got this splitter. To get the controller color, there's actually a shortcut. If we just delete the splitter, we can actually use the player ownership signal or a player info type of wire and wire it directly into a color, and it will just get that color out of it. So you don't even need to split it. And I'll do the same over here. So I'll just remove that bit and wire that right into here, and now possess it. So it's white until I possess it, and it still works because it says, oh, there's an actual real color here, so I'll use that instead of the other signals we've got. And then if I emit stuff, that still works as well. And it actually looks like it works a little better because it doesn't have to go through that splitter. It's just instantaneous knowing what color it is. In fact, all of these signals are actually player info type of signals. So it always tells you what player is pressing that button, effectively. So if we put that onto remote controllable, and I press the X button, the square button, then it tells us that player 1 pressed the square button. But these are basically aren't just thin wire signals, they are fat wire signals. And that's kind of useful when it's remote controllable, because you could have player 1 and player 2 outputting signals from here, and then from a splitter you can say, oh, player 1 press square or player 2 press square, while using just one controller. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something interesting. Go to patreon.com/TAPgiles to learn something new every day.